There are times in my life when I know I'm about to do a thing where I might die, and the thing that I'm going to do might kill me the very next day. But I do it nonetheless, and nights before these things, like fights, I often go to a hill, or I go outside, and I sit in my car or I stand outside. I get a notebook out, and I ask some fundamental questions about my own life. One of these questions that has always plagued me my entire life is whether or not there's a meaning to life, and are we conscious, and more importantly, it's the question of death. And while you may ask, well, what is the question of death? And I don't think there's any parameters where you can really understand what this question is unless you fully comprehend it. But I believe that every human understands it, aside from those who are really theologically involved, namely that we will die, right? So how do we deal with that? How do you deal with your own death? I think it's a not an important question, but it's one that bothers me. And if you don't address it, your life will often feel devoid of meaning until you forget it again. I was reading this one book by Leo Tolstoy. It was called On Confessions or My Confessions. Depending on the translation, the title may vary. But he discusses about how his life, he was very inclined by the Catholic or Christian religion. I'm not good at differentiating the two. I find them to be incredibly similar. But he was discussing how he was very inclined with that growing up, although he never truly believed in it. It was more just he said that he believed in it. But when he came later into life, he realized that he did not believe it. And this led him, after many years, into a rabbit hole of asking the question, what is the meaning of life if we're just going to die? And it's a stringent one. It's one that really does bother you, right? So on one of the nights where I contemplated this, I attempted to come up with an answer of how to deal with your death. And this is not my normal format. I have no script here. I'm just talking. So consider this more of a short podcast or whatever you wish. And I'm just going to try to represent all of my thoughts possible. This is complicated. So I want to first start off by saying that we can't have morals. So all of philosophy, or at least the ethics section, is pretty useless. I mean, it's a great way to define human morality and culture if you're really interested in that. But I mean, it does progress over time in relation to it, such as when you see Kant or even Nietzsche's God, whatever, right? The death of God, and then Plato's, it's all relevant to culture, sure. But the morality aspect, really, we don't have morality. Although right now, then after we decide we don't have morality, those were all the theological beliefs based on morals, right? We came to this new conception where there was eugenics, where it was science-based. We have no morals, we're just doing what's the best for humanity. But obviously, if you have any shred of a brain, you realize what's the best for humanity is a moral in itself. It's a value. You think that one human is more valuable than another. So in response to that eugenics movement started by Darwin's twin, Darwin, obviously the natural selection guy, his cousin, not his twin, created that movement. And we realized what the horrors were. We saw what happened to the Jews. We saw what happened to anyone who was an opposer of the Nazis or wasn't in the Aryan race, wherein they had blonde hair, blue eyes, or whatever the parameters were. Of course, a lot of it's, I think, lost to politics and history. But we realized how terrible that was, nonetheless. And so in the West, West as in the Americas, we realized this was so bad, and we created the humanist movement, where we decided that everyone is equal value. And obviously, I mean, in society, it's a great way to function, because that's how we should function as a society. If we want to protect our own freedom, in some, I don't know, non-altruistic way, right? But that inherent in itself, the humanistic method wherein everyone's equal, is a value in itself. No one really has value. No one doesn't. No one, Like the idea of people having value and worth and rights, it's all just made up. You can't, like, it's a great social construct, and communism, sure, whatever you want to, like, whatever social construct you want to go, it's all in your mind. I mean, how are you going to, like, justify that there's any value in any human, whether you're a communist, whether you're a capitalist? I mean, it's all based on morals, how you frame society, right? So we gotta take those out of the equations when we're really deciding how to orient your own life and your own death, right? So we try to take out morality. So we can't base how to live life or how to die or what death is on that stuff. And theological values. Ideally, you can't. There are some exceptions which I think, address later, such as quantum physics. There's a quantum particle splitting, wherein determinism may possibly not be so deterministic, and I think it's worth addressing, although it's kind of like a hard question, like, because it's just such a theoretical field. How are you really gonna say that it's totally deterministic, right? Or not deterministic because of that one thing where you haven't proven it yet. And then we come into the other field of inquiry, where actually people argue that science itself doesn't really infer anything totally, and that you can really only find things that are deterministic through science, right? So therefore we might have free will, right? And there might be a God too. And I think that leads into my second argument, or second piece, where we may ask the question of, hey, maybe death does have value, or maybe at least life has value if we have free will. And according to all science and reason, it appears that we don't. At least all of our cognitive understanding of the brain. I mean, you could take the Likert test, and that's one prominent example. People argue against it, but there's no really strong argument. It's basically that you can have a representation of what you're doing in your head, and we can detect the neurons before you actually do the action itself. People may argue, oh, well, you had a conscious representation. This is before your conscious representation, they can detect it. And this is seen in a multitude of other things. I mean, it's why you can't really control half the function of your body most of the time. And you don't choose to. You don't choose when you walk. You don't choose all of your bodily functions. And then people argue, well, at the highest levels, there may be. If you do any cognitive research, you will see it is not the case that you can really control your mood or anything that much. I mean, your consciousness seems to be like this weird thing that we can't really understand what its place is, because sure, it may represent things. Maybe it's a good thing for, like, projecting the future, right? Or maybe it's a good thing for meme generation, such as spreading ideas. And that's a really good theory that I like. I believe that you had Dawkins talk about it, you had Yuval Harris talk about it, and it's this idea where the reason why we developed the consciousness to the degree that we did, whereas animals, according to theoretical thought, do not have it, is that we can spread memes or fictional thoughts between each other. Like, for example, I could tell you that there was a red unicorn, right? And you would actually believe it. I couldn't tell a dog something like that, even if I had the facilities to, because they couldn't possibly believe in such a thing, nor do they have the language capacity, right? And no animal does. So that's kind of the difference, right? Now, I wonder to what extent Neanderthals and all the other homogeneous animals had it, right? Because, God, does that fascinate me, especially Neanderthals. I mean, fuck, right? That really plays a massive question of what the fuck is going on. But yeah, we don't really have much cognitive control. And furthermore, this brings me into an argument by David Hume, funny enough, right? People are thinking, oh, well, he's so old, there's no way that it could have any real relevance. He had this idea, I think it's the theater of the self, where basically you have all these different objects, and that's your experience or your perceptions, right? When you feel, that's what you experience. But you can really only live in a single moment of time that's beyond measurement. You don't have a second of life that you're really alive. It's this minuscule fraction that can't really be measured. You don't have the time to string thoughts together. You aren't conscious, and you have to kind of accept that if you're going to go down this cognitive pathway. So, I mean, it's terrible, it sucks, but that's the reality of it. You're not really conscious. You're just experiencing what your brain's doing, and you can't even possibly be conscious because you can't transcend time to create a thought that, transcends time. It's just parts, and your brain builds it up beyond your possibility, if that makes any sense. It's a hard concept, but that's where I was really like, oh shit, all I'm really doing right now is experiencing this one moment. Next moment, it may not even really be me, but because the brain's moved on past this one moment when I'm alive, if that makes any sense. Anyways, I think that's a good place to stop right now. I'm gonna focus on part 2 soon, where we're gonna discuss a few more arguments before, such as like neurology and whatnot, whatever I can, and we're going to discuss what it means for death.